Haidong! In this video, we're going to cover basics part 5. Last time we talked about Tao Song in some detail. I want to do a little bit more with it just to give you a little bit more, again, ideas about how to use Tao Song. And then we're going to go into the next portion, which is going to be the Chianti, or the walking stance. So if we take a look at the Federation Tao Song, right? So again, the sword is upright, your right hand is as it was before, but your left hand is going to shift or pommel shift. So it's going to be about, the guard is about jaw level and kind of hovering this way. Now, one thing that I've kind of heard, I really like this idea, and I wish I remember where I heard it, is almost think about this right hand almost like you're doing archery. So you're pulling it back this way. Again, when you do archery, you're pulling the deep shoulders in. So if you're here, that's kind of the same idea here, right? So the elbow is back. Again, one idea behind this is you don't want it flaring out this way, because first of all, look at this wrist, it's not really that good, versus if you talk about, if you have this flared out, you're an extra target, versus if it's back this way, I can tell it's a lot harder to hit either my wrist, because it's actually protected now by the guard, but also my elbow, which is back. Now obviously the left hand is a little bit more open. That's also why we're shifting it to pull it closer to the chest this way. Just so you know, I've also seen the Tao Song done a few other ways, according to different teachers and a lot of fun stuff. So of the Federation style, this is the one I usually go with. Again, it's tucked in and back. The idea is if I want to thrust my shoulder into it and get into like a block or something like that. But mostly just getting everything out of the way. Now, I've also seen something a little bit more out here, which is more of a present arms sort of deal. I've also seen like higher and lower and a lot of fun stuff. But for all intents and purposes, so long as the elbow is back, almost like you're preparing to shoot an arrow, and your left hand is pommel shift, and the guard is about jaw level, you're doing pretty well with a Federation Tao Song. Now, there are other styles, other martial arts that use a guard very similar to this, that I do want to go through, and this is something that I would go through as I introduce this to my, at this point, white belt, right? So yes, this is Federation, right? Now, obviously, if you see me trying to attack from this guard, what will you see, right? So first of all, I will need to cock it back if I want to have any diagonal cut power. If I am going to push forward with a cut, notice that my left hand would need to shift into a normal grip, which would mean if it's shifting, it has no power, right? So that means this hand is not contributing to any forward momentum, it's just going along for the ride as you shift from one to the other. Now that said, having a pommel shift is not bad in and of itself. You do this actually quite often in, again, other martial arts, such as HEMA, when you do, one of my favorite ones I never really got to spar with, I really want to do more, but the bicorno, right? So if you switch into this one, right? This is going to be a lot, I probably am not doing that well, so I'm sure my HEMA instructor, if he sees this video, will be like, no. Not at all. But you do it in other martial arts. You also do it again in Gumdo. You might do it a little bit more in Bangkok and above. But for now, this is the introduction to it, right? So you're pommel shifting, right? So you can kind of get everything closer to safety. So one thing that I might mention is here, so something that I've heard from the German longsword, I guess the translation that I've heard, this may not be HEMA anymore, I heard this from a different source when I was much younger, but the Wrath Guard, I don't know what the German is, but it's here, right? Now, if you're from a Japanese background or from a Iaido background, this is also a Japanese guard, right? So for example, in Iaido, a Iaido form, you drop back here, right? This is very, very similar to the German Wrath Guard. Now, obviously, that'll be with a longer sword. But this is also just a generally good sparring position. I believe, I'm probably going to be very wrong about this, but the Italians might call it like a relaxed Queen's Guard, right? So Queen is all the way back here. This is a little more relaxed. I could be wrong. So if anyone from my HEMA group sees this and they're like, it's not at all, let me know. But this is a very different, yet very similar guard, right? So this is still a middle guard in a sense, right? So if you think about high, middle, low, this is still a middle guard of a sense, right? So Tao Song is good for, again, keeping everything away and maybe being able to come up into a cut. This is going to be good for short jabs. So now you're not going to be able to do that powerful of a cut unless we cock it back a little bit more. But from here, if I need to, I can just snap into a strike, right? I can parry, cut. I can do a lot from this guard, and also I can easily protect my wrist if I need to, right? So for example, when I'm sparring, and if you spar me, you know I love this guard, and you go for my wrist, all you need to do is like let you miss and then go for a headshot. Or if you're going for this wrist, I can just snap the wrist shot. This is going to be very similar to when we do high guard, but we can eventually do one-handed strikes, which is actually in the video I think I did in the past. So it's all coming together. So I know this was a little bit long-winded, but there's a couple things I want you to focus on when you're doing Tao Song Se. Another drill that you can do, right? So remember for Tao Song Se, again, knee is above belt level. It's covering your silhouette, and you are get the toes down and up. And one thing I like to do is keeping the leg up, do some center cuts, right? Do some cha u pegi, samdan pegi, and even if you're into it, maybe some guangcha pegi or something like that. The cross cuts really make this difficult, but try to do some cuts with the leg up to potentially frustrate your students, but it's a good thing for balance. Another thing that I like to do is actually, so this is going to be especially if you have some second degrees, maybe even some first degrees who might know some of these techniques, but definitely like second and third degrees should know something like this, right? So if we have that knee up, right? So what I like to do is obviously like hold this for a little bit, and then, so take a portion from a form that they know, for example, Yedo 2 or Banguk, Banguk 4 or Shimsong. Oh, it's not a Shimsong, but it's close to Shimsong. From here, just all I want you to do is reach, right? So hold the reach, use this as counterbalance, bring it back in, other side, right? So from here, maybe use your knee as counterbalance for your horizontal motion, or you can do, so Federation does this, cross cut, raise. I like to do, as I'm doing my cross cut, bring my knee up for counterbalance, and then raise it up. But for now, let's just do some Federation, right? So clear, up, and from here, around the head for a one-handed strike, right? Bring it back in, and then eventually we're going to put it down for Chianti. So as you land, you're just going to plant, right? Plant down in Chianti, right? So Chianti is our walking stance. Now I talked about this in the stance video, I think, but let's talk briefly about Chianti, right? So this is the next part in the basics. This is where I introduce it, right? So what I like to do from here, all we're going to do is land. Now if they know the sequence, right, they're going to land, apro, forward, duiro, charo, uro, right? But if they're new, right, so assuming, like this is kind of assuming you're teaching it to new people, what I like to do is this, right? So actually, normally I start with the walking stance and I start with and then I do the basics. But assuming you didn't do that, right, so you're like, all right, I want to do basics, let's start with Chianti. So Chianti is that interesting stance, right, because it mimics something that you do in everyday life, like many of us walk, right? Now, very few of us are going to be walking like this, right? It just doesn't happen. I think I did it when I was in high school just to try it out. Weird looks, as it happens. But Chianti is kind of like that transition from the everyday world to the martial arts world, which is one of the reasons why I really like Gumdo specifically, because it does actually mimic, real human action, right? Maybe with the exception of stuff like this, but, right, so if we're in walking stance, right, so what I might do first is like, all right, now I want you to do, very hardcore, walk down this portion, like, all right, I'm just gonna walk, like, okay, now what do you feel when you walk? So this is actually where I'd like to introduce the different body, like the major muscle groups, as we talk about movement, right? Because what we did before was, Teino-se, we did Tao Song Se, we did Kima-se. We didn't really move with a stance yet. So this is the first time they're trying to, go in eventually 4 directions in a stance, right? So what I do is like, all right, so like take a walk. All right, now this time around, right? So be aware of your weight. So do you do a heel roll, heel roll, heel roll? Now if you do that, what are your glutes doing? What are your thighs doing? What is your core doing? What is your lower back doing? The exact 4 things, right, that we mentioned, well, not heels, but the 4 things that we mentioned with Kima-se, right? So if we're here, right, all right, so like just walk, right? Like, all right, Like, oh, I feel like I actually don't use my glutes, or I don't do blah, 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 blah. Okay, try using your glutes. Like, all right, right? So then you start to get like a little bit more feedback. It's like, all right, so now, walk down, everything parallel, right? So a lot of people kind of like walk like maybe slightly open, right? Most people don't walk this way, I assume, because that would be very uncomfortable. It's like, all right, as you're walking down, try to keep, your heels parallel, all that fun stuff. Just walk, and be very active, and be very conscious of your glutes, conscious of your core, right? So probably do this in pairs first. Like, don't do all 4 of them because that might drive them nuts. It's like, all right, so glutes and core, right? So your glutes are going to do this. Your core is going to keep it centered, right? So they're equal and opposites, right? So this one wants to make you convex. This one wants to make you concave. Using both of them, it's going to keep you very upright. So this is also a point that I'd like to mention to my students, like, all right, so once you learn more about this martial art, make sure you bring it back into your everyday movements, right? So for example, the way I used to move before I really started to integrate martial arts with my actual movement, I had a lot of lower back problems. Still do, but I had a lot of lower back problems because I never engaged my glutes or my lower back or my core when I walked. So if you do start to at least be conscious of it as you move, right? So if you're here, like, all right, so glutes and core. Okay, that's a little bit weird. So again, the first couple times they're going to do it, they're going to look like Frankenstein's monster, right? Which is going to be really strange. But as they do it more, they're going to be like, oh, I don't feel tired as I walk now, right? It's like, all right, so after you do that for a little bit, right? It's like, all right, so for now, just keep your right foot forward, right? Now, if they are a martial artist, this might feel weird, especially if they came from Taekwondo, right? Because your fighting stance in martial arts is usually right hand back, or well, right hand, but also right leg back because that's your dominant foot, usually if you're right-handed. But Gumdo is going to have your right foot forward. Okay. So there are a couple things with that as well, right? So I mentioned in my stance video there's going to be a little bit of difference between what exactly I'm going to do and what the Federation is going to do, so warning, right? But for now, everything should be fairly canonical, right? So the reason you're going to have your right foot forward in general, right, is you want your heart slightly further back. Now, if you're very square, that's not going to help, but that's at least one explanation of why you have your right foot forward, is you have a little bit more ease of access this way. Another thing is, if you are more right-hand dominant, especially when you do one-handed stuff, you want your dominant hand forward, right? So if I'm doing this is a guard as well, but it's a lot shorter range, versus this one, I can be a lot more long range, right? So especially if you have seen fencing, so European fencing, this is what they do, right? In theory. I never actually fenced. So that's one reason why we have our right foot forward, but this is also where I'd like to talk about movement, right? So all we're doing is in defense, right? So we're in Kenjok, right? I might, again, reinforce, okay, what is Kenjok? You want your point honed in my throat, so if I did something silly, you can be like, bang, right? But what we can do here is like, all right, so all I want you to do is I want you to slide forward. And this is also where I'm going to differentiate between sliding and stepping, right? In Hima, I think this is a step and a passing step. So passing step is stepping forward, stepping is just sliding, but I find sliding and stepping a little bit easier to just digest. Like, oh, all I want you to do is I want you to slide forward. Now I might even leave the sword out of the equation. I'm going to step back a little bit more so you can see my feet. Now if you want to, when you very first start teaching this, like, all right, all I want you to do is come forward and bring your foot up. Okay, nothing crazy yet. Like, all right, do it again. All right, just keep going, just keep going, just going. And when you kind of come up against the wall, it's like, all right, now slide back. So depending on your student, they might try to do the step, or they might try to push back, but then things are going to get a little weird. So one thing that I would like to keep in mind, so as an instructor, is if you do this, right, so like, all right, so slide forward, slide forward, slide forward, slide back, they might do this thing. So be aware, I think that's in camera, but let's make sure, that, right? You don't want the heel to stay down while the toes come up. Now, again, you can explain why, right? Because if you do this, try to bail like over there if I need to. Right? Not good. Try bail over there. Not great. Versus if you keep the ball of your foot down, right? And if I'm sliding in, oh, bail. Whoop. Right? Like, again, sliding in, bail. Whoop. much easier. You're able to change your direction a lot more efficiently, as opposed to you have your heel up. Even if it's for a short amount of time, that's going to be a big opening, right? So again, when I'm sparring someone, and it's usually someone fairly new, so I think most of us kind of fix it near the end. If you do that, right, I'm going to keep bowling forward, right? So it's not usually just at one time. They're going to do this kind of thing, and once they do that, they're just going to stumble and they're going to be very off balance, very easy to dispatch. So be careful about that. But yeah, so all we're going to do, slide forward, slide forward, slide forward, sliding back. All right, so make sure you keep that toe down, toe down, toe down. Now, so this is, spoiler, this is something I'm taking from Kendo. This is called Suryashi, right? When it comes to, from Kendo, so it's slide, 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 right? Going back, slide, 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 slide. Looks a little bit silly, right? But that's going to be very important because it's working on maintaining, control, right? So if I wanted to, slide, 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 bail, you can, right? Now, I could say bail left or bail right, just to see how they do that. But that's something that you could do. Now, eventually, so this is not going to be part of the basics yet, but it's part of the same drill. So in Kendo, this is called Ainyashi, right? So if you're here, so instead of always having this foot forward, step, right? Now, that wasn't Ainyashi. Ainyashi is here, right? So you're stepping. So actually, if you notice, we actually started with Ainyashi. We started with the switch step. We started using the glutes. We started using the core. We started using lower back and thigh, right? So at this point, right, so all right, so you slid forward, you slid back. Now think about activating that glute. All right, glute, 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 glute. So this glute, right, glute, glute. So this is introducing the idea of muscle groups, the major muscle groups, in terms of moving with the sword. That's actually where I'm going to call it for now, right? So what I'd like you to do for your own training is think about engaging those muscle groups. So especially when you're doing walking stance, so again, think about, those 4 major groups, at least when you're just moving. So again, your glutes, your lower core, your thighs, and your lower back, right? And try going through those particular drills, right? So if you're here, you want to be like sliding forward, sliding back, sliding back. Another thing is keep the Ainyashi or the switching step in mind as well. Now this is not as federation-y as the forward motion, right? Now we do something like this, so think about Sangsu 8, right? So we actually do a little bit of both, right? So we do slide, slide, and then step, 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 right? Now that stepping is going to be a little bit different because it's more elongated, so it's more like Sodosei step as opposed to a Chianti step, but it's going to be a similar concept, right? So I want you to think about switching the weight between the glutes. This is something that you did, obviously, when you're doing the switching for like Teirosei, Sodosei, and stuff like that. We haven't done Sodosei yet, but that's the idea, right? So from here, right, so as I'm pushing forward, activate your right glute, left glute, right glute, etc. And as you're moving back, right, all that fun stuff. So also keep that in mind as you go through your forms, right? So have that not just passive awareness, but active awareness of those 4 muscle groups as you go through your forms. But with that, we're going to call it at least for this one, and I'll see you in the next video. So as usual, so stay safe, stay humble, and keep training. Haidong!